In the hush of a quiet evening, when the last rays of daylight stretch across an empty tennis court, there is a softness that settles over the still air. The echo of footsteps on painted concrete, the faint rustle of fabric as a player shifts, weight from foot to foot, the breath before the swing, the exhale after, and the sound, so delicate and clean, of a single tennis ball striking the center of a string bed and soaring. Most athletes arrive like storms, with noise, blaze, eyes turned, headlines written before the match even starts. But Naomi Osaka arrived like a breath present, watching, listening, not rushing to fill the silence, but embracing it, not emptiness, but presence. And in that stillness, something was forming, not just a champion, but a calm, a balance, a revolution that came not with noise, but with elegance. She would win, often, on grand stages, faces upturned toward her light. But the power she held would not flow from raised fists or shouts of victory. It would come from the gentle steadiness of being herself, no matter how loud the world demanded otherwise. Naomi Osaka is perhaps the quietest icon ever forged in modern sport. Yet it is in her quiet that we hear so much. The hush after a serve, that bends physics to its will. The bow after a match, customary and respectful. So slight, yet binding past to present. She belongs to many worlds, born in Japan, raised in the United States, carrying Haitian and Japanese heritage in her name, her blood, her gaze. And with every victory, she stepped between these worlds. With grace, never pretending it was simple, but never letting complexity harden the heart of her joy. And so, in this hour, we trace the quiet arc of her journey. We listen not to the roar of the crowd, but to the spaces between each point. The waiting, the learning, the refusal to hurry, the right to be soft, even when bearing the weight of a generation. This is not the story of wins and losses, not merely. This is the portrait of a life lived at its own volume, slow, deliberate. Grounded, we'll begin where all currents begin, in the stillness before the wave, in the silence before the serve. Her story starts in the gentle curve of islands and oceans, where seas from different shores meet. In her case, Haiti and Japan, to places of beauty, of depth, of history. One side a nation born of revolution and resilience, the other an island of introspection and ceremony, where precision meets poetry. Her mother, Naomi Osaka, born and raised in the northernmost Japanese island of Hokkaido, stoic, graceful, traditional. Her father, Leonard Francois, born in Hatta, passionate, determined, philosophical in his ambitions. They met in Sapporo in the early 1990s, where East met West beneath heavy snow. Their love was neither expected nor accepted by all. Japan, culturally uniform in many senses, viewed their union with unease. Tamaki faced family estrangement, silence, disapproval that felt too heavy to name. But from the very beginning, resistance would be part of the story, and so would courage. Eventually, Tamaki and Leonard would move, seeking space, an open field, a different shore. They found it in the United States, first in Long Island, New York, and it was there, in October 1997, that their second daughter was born, Naomi. They gave her the mother's surname Osaka choice, both legal and symbolic. Her belonging would be tenderly complicated. As a child, Naomi was quiet, not reticent, but observant. Her eyes lingered. Her questions came slowly, but with thought. She would ask before entering a room, hover long before joining conversation. Her energy was low on flash, high on presence. Unlike her sister Mari, older by 18 months and quicker to speak, Naomi studied by watching, by absorbing. Leonard, seeing Serena and Venus Williams take to the courts in the 1990s, saw more than a pair of sisters. He saw a blueprint, a pair of black girls rising in a white-dominated sport, coached by a father without formal training, learning not from tradition, but from trust. Could he do the same? He could at least try. And so, before they were tall enough to see over the net, the Osaka sisters practiced. Relentlessly in mismatched shoes, in public courts, in borrowed sunlight. When Naomi was 3, a racket looked like a paddle in her hand. By the time she was 7, her serve hit with a snap. That startled adults. Leonard read tennis books by night, studying biomechanics and footwork diagrams. By day, he repeated the drills, again, again, again. No shortcuts, no expensive clubs, no professional coaches, just a vision carried forward by sweat. They eventually left New York for Pembroke Pines, Florida, place where tennis bloomed year-round, where sun-soaked courts waited all hours. Childhood was not what most would recognize. No school dances, few birthday parties, homeschooled from a young age. The rhythm of her days set by serves, sprints, and calisthenics. Naomi didn't complain, nor did she boast. There was, instead, a middle ground, where she did not protest her path but also never chased the spotlight it hinted toward. She was being molded, not into a product, but into a presence. Among the many drills taught by her father, the most important might have been how to breathe, how to return to center, how to blink away defeat and nod humbly at victory. And so, as her body grew stronger and her swing more precise, something else grew quietly beside her, a steadiness, a root system fencing deep beneath the concrete of every court she touched. By 15, Naomi had already begun to turn heads at junior tournaments, not for antics, not for victory dances, but for something more rare in someone so young. Composure. Her body language rarely changed, no matter the score. Her shoulders remained even, her expression a gentle wash of thoughtfulness and internal tempo, never rushed, which is not to say she lacked emotion. It simply meant she chose how to carry it. When asked which country she wished to represent, Japan or the United States, she chose Japan. A choice not of rejection, but of belonging. Japan had been woven through her childhood, through her mother's cuisine, her language, her bedtime stories. It was her birthplace as well as her myth. The place whose customs lived quietly in the corners of every home she ever knew. And yet, Japan received her ambivaliently. Her skin marked her as non-traditional. Her last name kept her connected, but her hair, her father's gaze, the hues of her childhood told a more intricate truth. Still, she embraced it all. She was not a half, not a confusion. She was Naomi, and she listened to no one else's tempo but her own. We all wish to roar when we're ready, but she whispered, and the world began to lean in. She was born on the 10th day of October in the port city from which she would take her surname, a city edged by the Pacific, where bright lights reflect softly in the bay and trains hum like lullabies through crowded streets. Osaka, a place tugged by tradition and tempo, city of rhythm and ceremony, of vending machines glowing in midnight silence, and bullet trains carving ribbons of motion across the land. She would not remain there long, but the name attached itself to her story like the gentle anchor of memory. Naomi Osaka. Her name, soft and urgent at once, spoke of bridges between land and sea, heritage and hope. Her mother, Naomi Osaka, came from Hokkaido's cold frontier, its snowy winters and measured silences. She was raised within Japan's calm and codified culture. There are rituals for hellos there, for thanks, for leaving rooms and offering gifts. Life is studied before it is spoken. Tamaki carried all of that with her, but she also carried a strength that would one day echo through Naomi's posture. Her father, Leonard Francois, came from Haiti, a land reared in revolution, lush with rhythm and reverence, scarred by history but seeded with spirit. Leonard brought music to his words, thoughtfulness behind his quiet eyes. He believed in maps that hadn't yet been drawn, and he saw possibility where others saw limits. They met in Sapporo under snow-covered skies. It was the early 1990s, time when Japan was even more inward, more reserved, more unyielding in its mirrors. Their love did not fit the rules. Interracial marriage, especially between black and Japanese citizens, was viewed with suspicion or worse, shame. Tamaki's choice was met not with congratulations, but with an icy wall of silence. Her family cut ties. Community turned its face. But love, true love, does not ask for permission. It grows where it can. And so they moved, carried their sorrow and strength together into the unknown. The United States was not perfect, but it was wider. The ceilings a bit higher, the roads a little longer. In Long Island, they carved out a quiet life. Modest, intentional. Tamaki worked diligently, silently, stitching stability into uncertain days. Leonard dreamed vast dreams behind steady hands. They had 2 daughters, Mari, bursting with energy, Naomi, more watchful, more quiet. From the start, Naomi's presence pulsed like soft frequency beneath the daily noise. She absorbed everything: her sister's movements, her parents' expressions, the way shadows moved across wooden floors. She held her feelings close. When other children ran, she wandered. When others spoke, she listened. Leonard, ever the observer, himself noticed something else. A moment, perhaps slight, when she touched a tennis racket and held it the way one holds a pen before a poem. During those early 2000s, the Williams sisters were changing tennis, changing the image of what strength could look like, what it could sound like. Hair beaded, voices unapologetic. Leonard watched Richard Williams not as a fan, but as a father. Here was a man who raised champions, with no formal coaching, no endorsements, just belief. Leonard decided he would learn the game. He would teach it, not with perfection, but with patience. The lessons began before the girls had grown into their sneakers. Public parks, clunky rackets, wind-frayed nets sagging in the middle. No private lessons, no trophies for now. Those would come later. What mattered was repetition, rhythm, a way of seeing the ball, the movement, the match before it happened. They hit balls for hours. In mornings when the sun had just emerged, in dusks when neighboring courts grew empty. Naomi was deliberate, even then. She didn't rush the drills. She didn't complain about exhaustion or the sun. Occasionally, she giggled at missed shots. Sometimes she paused to tie her shoe twice, not because it was loose, but because it felt uneven. She was building something deep inside. Not a hunger for fame, but a hunger for mastery. Eventually, the family outgrew Long Island. The winters, the rhythms, the limitations, so they moved again to Florida, Pembroke Pines. Tennis courts littered the neighborhoods. The sun hovered overhead like a warm breath, and time moved slower, They're allowing more hours to hone a craft. The Osaka family didn't have access, no country clubs, no chrome-plated resources. But they had each other. Drills repeated again and again and again. Naomi hardly ever pushed back. Her resistance was different, if it appeared at all. It came in subtle recoiling, question marks in her eyes, or simply longer silences. In those Florida years, her swing grew sharper, her legs faster, her posture more precise. Leonard focused not only on ground strokes, but stillness, teaching her how to recenter between points, how to breathe, how to return to a place of calm over and over again. It was meditative, in a way. The routine of it, the silence between serves. Her sister Mari competed frequently, sometimes even outpacing Naomi in early matches. But Naomi's path was more inward, more layered. Interviews with childhood coaches described Naomi as present but quiet, gentle but alert. She didn't always give eye contact, but her eyes missed nothing. There were no sleepovers, no typical school dances. Her schooling was a blend of homeschooling and tennis academies. Calendars revolved around tournaments and recovery. Her social life was her family life, fanned the low bounce of a fuzzy yellow ball. Was it lonely? Perhaps. But Naomi never described it that way. Her aloneness was not sadness. It was prediction. The life of a champion would require solitude, and she was learning how to carry it. By the time she was a teenager, Naomi was tall, her limbs long, her stride fluid. She possessed not just athleticism, but restraint. Her movements sliced sharply, but her demeanor remained grounded. She would win points and quietly return to the baseline. Eyes down, breathing measured. One year at a junior tournament, a scout remarked, "She hits like she's telling a story." Her swings had cadence. Her tempo never rushed. Naomi represented more than an athlete. She was a puzzle piece, a daughter of multiple cultures, yet still whole. She looked at the rising tensions of identity and quietly stepped forward. When asked which country she would represent on the professional circuit, Japan or the United States, she replied with seriousness and calm, "Japan." Not as a headline, not as a statement piece, but as a thread of memory. She was born there. Her mother's lullabies were in Japanese. Her earliest tastes were of miso and rice. Her father read her histories from both lands, the spiritual, the political, the personal, choosing. Japan was not an exclusion, it was an inclusion. It was her way of stepping fully into one of her worlds, while still embodying both. Japan responded cautiously. Her melanin, her curls, her soft American drawl were reminders that she existed between categories. Some fans adored her, some questioned her, but Naomi never rushed into approval. She gave, patiently, the same way she swung, and soon, something extraordinary began to take shape, not in the headlines, not in the expected timelines, but in the hush between rising breaths. A young woman quietly becoming herself, and the world, whether it knew it yet or not, preparing to listen. She was still quiet, even as the stadiums grew larger, even as the lights took longer to dim, even as microphones hovered, waiting to catch a quote that might ripple through the narrative of rising stars. Naomi Osaka stepped into the professional world, not with trumpet and drum but on steady feet. Eyes forward, shoulders squared, her breath anchored just beneath the collarbone. The year was 2013. She was 15, and in her debut on the Women's Tennis Association stage, Naomi began to play not just against opponents, but against expectation itself. Her early matches were stories without punctuation. Long rallies, thoughtful serves, bridges between flash and form. Where others relied on intimidation, she relied on rhythm. The power was already there. Resistible, a blistering forehand that could pin a player behind the baseline. Serves that cracked against the court with unforgiving bite. But around those edges was something gentle, something measured. She didn't shake her fist after an ace. She didn't scream into the sky. Instead, she often turned back toward her towel, breathing slow, nodding, composed. Reporters noticed her first because she defeated names they knew, but they remembered her because she did. So while barely raising her voice, by 2016, Naomi had made it to the third round of the US Open, a major. There, she played Coco van der Weege, seasoned, aggressive American player, known for power and presence. Naomi, still largely unknown to the global public, walked out onto the court. Under a sky heavy with New York twilight, the world watched a match. But Naomi played a meditation. Point after point, she moved with fluid calculation, each step toward the ball deliberate. Each hit grounded in technique, born of repetition, not flamboyance. She won. And suddenly, eyes widened. Here was a teenager, eyes shadowed by a visor, gripping a racket quietly but firmly, playing like she belonged. Not everyone wins their first battle with the spotlight, but Naomi greeted the new gaze with a kind of internal patience. She didn't speak often in press rooms. Her interviews were marked by nervous laughter, short responses, and long pauses where many others would ramble. But when she did speak, she made it about the game. She spoke of hitting lines, of missing cues, of gratitude. There was no script, only candor, folded in shyness. And then came Indian Wells, 2018, a tournament nestled in the California desert. Kissed by dust and prestige there, Naomi made a run, softly but unmistakably. In the first round, she battered Maria Sharapova, one of the sport's longtime figures. She didn't just beat her, she outplayed her, outlasted her, unshook her, and without visible celebration, Naomi continued. She beat Radwanska, then Payelkova, then Halep, one after the other. Players with far more experience and higher seeds. Fell to a girl who walked off the court with the same quiet she had walked onto it with. And in the final, Naomi faced Daria Kasatkina. She played the full match with a kind of poised aggression, hitting heavy, stepping in but never faltering. In breath or balance, she kept her eyes open, her reactions sharp. She didn't flinch. And when the final point was won, she smiled, not widely, but upturn, raised the trophy with two hands, spoke into the microphone in her gentle, slightly hushed tone. Hi, Naomi. Hello. The audience laughed, kindly, warmly. And some exhaled, as if realizing they may have just witnessed the birth of something rare. A 20-year-old champion who would not brandish her win as dominance, but allow it to glow softly, like light filtering through paper. Indian Wells became a turning point. Commentators began to use words like future and phenom. Headlines ran with her name in bold, and yet the same girl who forgot to pack a proper speech for the trophy presentation remained composed. Her ritual didn't change. Practice quietly, compete ferociously, speak gently. That same year, Naomi began climbing the rankings. She played strong at the Miami Open and other major tournaments. But more than the results, what intrigued people was who she wasn't. She wasn't outgoing like Venus, not defiant like Serena, not as open as some, not as corporate as others, and yet she was herself, fully. On the court, her game was refining, her footwork faster, her shot-making cleaner. Her body, once gangly and raw, had begun to move like a well-read book, pages turning easily, chapters building toward crescendo. There was fire there, always but controlled, packaged within a frame that could burst when needed, but usually chose precision. Spectators began to turn toward her courts in the early rounds, not out of novelty, but to catch the rising rhythm, to see the serve that snapped as sharp as any veteran's, to watch the rallies often long, layered with contrast, the power of the shot and the silence of her celebration. Interviews painted her as reserved or quirky. She smiled more than she joked, laughed nervously more than confidently. Sometimes her gaze drifted away from the reporter altogether, but then came a moment, a sentence, and the room would quiet, because in that one sentence, whatever it was, a truth would pulse clear and lucid. She knew who she was. Even if she didn't yet know how to say it, she didn't need to say it. She played it, and with each tournament, with each match, Naomi was not just winning, she was becoming a presence. Something that didn't need to shout in order to be heard. Something that pulled crowds, not with personality alone, but with gravity, the kind that builds slowly, below the surface, before it moves mountains. The court was ready, a late summer evening in New York, the air thick with anticipation and floodlights casting soft halos on the blue surface of Arthur Ashe Stadium. The final of the 2018 US Open was beginning, and the seats were filled with the weight of history. Naomi Osaka stood at one baseline tall, steady, silent. Across from her, the legend, Serena Williams. 23 Grand Slam titles to her name, a force of nature, and Naomi's childhood hero. The match was more than a title bout. It was a quiet convergence of past and future, one arriving to lift the next. Naomi had watched Serena for years on television, on courts, on posters, her hair braided like hers, her gaze fixed upward toward the woman who had broken so many barriers. Now, the child of that gaze was walking onto the biggest stage the sport could offer. To face her, she was 20 years old, Serena, and yet, as they warmed up swapping ground strokes, beneath the hum of 20,000 faces, there was no trembling from Naomi, no flinch, only calm. She had made it here patiently, almost shyly, match by match, draw by draw, defeating Anna Sabalenka in 3 hard-fought sets, overcoming Lesia Sorenko blankly, 6-1, 6-1. Most memorably, she had powered past Madison Keys, the 2017 finalist, with the same quiet focus that had become her signature. And now, she stood not just in the presence of her idol, but opposite her. Some dreams are thunderous when they arrive. This one whispered. The match began from the first point. Naomi played without apology. Her forehands landed deep. Her serve, a thing of studied beauty, cut sharply through the silence. Serena, experienced and fearless as ever, answered with grit. But the crowd ... was restless. Not because of Naomi, but because they sensed the tide shifting. When Naomi broke Serena's serve in the first set, there was no celebratory fist pump, no scream, only a small, instinctive look toward her box where her coach and family sat, mouths tight with focus. She won the first set 6-2, and that is when the match turned not in score, But in tone, early in the second set, Serena received a code violation from the chair umpire, Carlos Ramos, for coaching, an accusation she firmly denied. A cascade followed. Arguments, broken racket, penalties that escalated, tempers flared, the stadium buzzed, boos rolled down from the stands like distant thunder. Through it all, Naomi stood waiting, towel draped in her hands, eyes lowered, breathing in, breathing out. She was not part of the controversy, but she was inside it. And yet, she did not unravel. She kept hitting her lines, kept pressing forward, kept returning to center after every point. When the match ended 6-2, 6-4, Naomi Osaka had defeated her idol. She had become the first Japanese player, male or female, to win a Grand Slam singles title. But the celebration did not arrive. As she walked to the net, there was no Rowanly tension. The crowd, defending Serena, booed the moment. Not Naomi herself, but the way the match had crumbled into controversy. And it was in that moment that contrast became everything. A young woman had just achieved the unthinkable, and yet she stood on the stage with her visor pulled low, shoulders hunched, tears spilling, apologizing for winning. It broke hearts quietly, this sudden vision of triumph, dulled by noise not her own. Serena, aware of the moment, would later place a comforting arm around Naomi's back during the ceremony, urge the audience to stop booing. She recognized what had been stolen, but Naomi, she bowed, took the microphone, and still gently whispered, "I know everyone was cheering for her, and I'm sorry it had to end like this. I just want to say thank you for watching the match." That sentence carried the weight of contradictions. Victory tied with sorrow, a childhood dream achieved in front of a weeping crowd. And yet, this was the purity of Naomi's presence. Even in sadness, she honored the moment, gave gratitude, breathed slowly, painted the atmosphere not with resentment, but reverence. She knew everything had changed, that her name would, from now on, exist in a different register. And yet, she didn't try to hold it louder. She didn't assert, she allowed. Let the moment settle, as it was broken and beautiful. The press afterward asked her about the controversy. She answered softly, "I felt like I had to stay focused. I didn't want to get distracted. I just wanted to play." It wasn't deflection, it was discipline. The same internal compass that had guided her through teenage years of repetition and sacrifice now navigated her through the storm of attention. Her sponsor deals multiplied. Her name surged in search engines. Japan celebrated her Grand Slam win, while also, for some, re-evaluating what it really meant to be Japanese. She was biracial, fluent in English, quiet to a fault, but undeniable, and in that final, twisted not into the narrative of tension, but into something deeper. Naomi showed grace beyond measure. She taught something ineffable, that sometimes maturity is not loud. It doesn't bark or declare. Sometimes it simply bows, says thank you, and walks into history holding both flowers and silence. She carried the trophy with two hands, as softly as a child carries a lantern, and walked forward not just as a champion, but as a revelation. Victory doesn't always come with cheers. Sometimes it comes with whispers, and sometimes the quietest victory echoes the longest. She lingered in the spotlight, not out of comfort, but out of purpose. After the US Open in 2018, Naomi Osaka was no longer emerging. She was arrived, not just as a Grand Slam champion, but as a symbol, and around her, the world buzzed. Endorsement deals burst forth, Her name filled headlines. Her face appeared in commercials, on billboards, in interviews both reverent and intrusive. She smiled through them, gently, bowed toward the noise and allowed it, as she had learned to do. But inside, the current shifted. With each passing tournament, victory came with a new kind of pressure, a magnifying glass held by millions. Expectation curled around every match, like heat off a hard-court dot. In January 2019, she proved her victory was no accident. She claimed her second Grand Slam title, this time in Melbourne. At the Australian Open, the final was blistering, emotional. She faced Petra Kvitova, a two-time Wimbledon champion, and beat her in 3 taut sets. There was no scandal, no controversy. Only tennis. Naomi won, and suddenly she was world number 1. The first Asian player ever to achieve that ranking, man or woman. Yet even at the summit, Naomi's chest did not puff with pride. Instead, she exhaled, lightly, almost as if to ask, "Now what?" Because the attention didn't just grow, it multiplied. Press rooms became more crowded. Reporters stretched every phrase she uttered. Questions turned personal. "How do you feel? Why don't you smile more? Do you belong here?" She answered in her own time, sometimes giggling awkwardly, sometimes blinking and looking away, and sometimes saying nothing at all. The momentum carried into another year. But Naomi felt herself beginning to fray along the seams. She still won matches, but she also began to lose them. Mid-2019 brought challenges, losses earlier than expected, an unexpected coaching split, and with every stumble, the same questions returned. Was she just a flash? Was she only strong in silence? Naomi never responded, angrily, but her eyes sometimes told stories her words did not. And then 2020 unfolded. The world slowed, grounded itself. The global pandemic wrapped sports in stillness. Matches suspended, arenas emptied of spectators, the game left with echoes. And uncertainty, Naomi retreated inward, like many. She paused, trained quietly, reflected, and as the world grappled with illness, death, and isolation, another fire spread through the seams of society. George Floyd was murdered in May 2020, and the world caught its breath. Across the United States and beyond, protests ignited. Marches swelled in cities and towns. Conversations deepened, widened, burned slow and hot, around family tables, on social media timelines, in public spaces and private hearts. And Naomi, woman of both Haitian and Japanese lineage, shaped by 2 cultures and raised in the United States, stood at a precipice once again. She did not raise her voice, but she spoke. She flew to Minneapolis, joined marches, walked among grieving strangers, holding signs with names like echoes in interviews. She answered not with slogans but clarity. She wrote, "I'm done being shy." When the 2020 US Open resumed with masks, silence, and strange distance, Naomi stepped onto the court with a statement larger than sport. She wore 7 different black masks across 7 matches. Each mask bore a name: Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice. 7 lives taken, 7 stories memorialized in cloth and courage. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't pause to explain. She let the names speak, bearing them both physically and emotionally. And match by match, Naomi advanced through powerful serves, through ruthless composure, Some questioned whether protest belonged on the court, but Naomi felt no conflict. She answered in post-match interviews with plain grace. The point is to make people start talking. That year, she won the US Open again, a second title on the same ground, but in vastly different soil. No crowd to raise the volume, only stillness between serves and photographs of her kneeling, of her masked, of her holding a trophy as if offering something deeper than victory. She had entered the arena as a largely apolitical figure, young, reserved, but now she was something else, not louder, but more visible, and with visibility came pressure, not only to win matches, but to represent a nation, a movement, a standard, a statement. And then, in May 2021, Naomi made a choice. She declined to participate in press conferences at the French Open. She explained gently, through social media and prepared statements, that the mental strain of dealing with press, especially after losses, had become damaging. She was protecting her inner space, not from the sport, but from the storm beyond it. The response was swift. Fines were threatened, participation challenged, old arguments about athlete responsibility resurfaced. But Naomi held her ground. She withdrew from the tournament entirely, and then, a few weeks later, she withdrew from Wimbledon. It sent shockwaves. A world-class athlete walking away, not in defeat, but in defense. For her mental health, what was once whispered in locker rooms or hidden behind polite nods, she said outright, "I need a break." In doing so, Naomi didn't just take care of herself, she opened a door. Other athletes soon followed. Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, Kevin Love. The new conversation emerged not about weakness, but about balance. What does strength look like when it chooses to be soft? Can self-preservation be public? Naomi didn't try to own the dialogue. She never claimed to be a leader. She simply stood where she was, quiet, again, but rooted. She was no longer the girl apologizing beneath a visor. She was a woman making room for her own breath. And in the quiet that followed, the world listened. They listened because they had no choice, because she refused to speak louder, and yet still they heard her. There is a quiet that follows healing, a space where echoes cease, where the pulse slows, and the body becomes gently reacquainted with itself. After the intensity of headlines, matches, microphones, and expectation, Naomi Osaka chose that quiet, not to disappear, but to breathe, to listen inwardly once more, toward the sound that had carried her all along, her own rhythm, following her withdrawal from the Grand Slam circuit in 2021. Naomi's days looked different. There were no center courts, no press rooms, no standings to rise or defend. There was a return to simplicity, to long thoughts beneath sunlight, to still mornings with her feet in the grass, to solitude that didn't ache but soothed the outside world. Tried to define it as absence, but for Naomi, it was presence. There is often unease when athletes say no, when they step away rather than forward, when they choose stillness instead of stamina. But in her pause, Naomi joined a quiet revolution unfolding across sport. Others, like Simone Biles, echoed her stance. A new vocabulary began to take shape, not rooted in dominance or grind, but in words like boundary, balance, and care. Naomi became a reference point. Her decision to protect her mental health was analyzed, praised, criticized, and ultimately respected. But while others debated the meaning of her pause, Naomi slowly began shaping a new chapter, one that moved not only on courts, but in studios, boardrooms, and communities. She honored her heritage not only through flags, but through action. She launched a skincare line, Kinlo, a project born of both personal need and cultural acknowledgement. Kinlo was designed for melanated skin, inspired by Naomi's own experience with sunscreen and sun care as a biracial woman. For too long, the skincare market had overlooked this space. Naomi stepped in not with slogans, but with structure. It was more than business. It was visibility, a statement in product form. You deserve to be seen and protected in parallel. Naomi built Evolve, talent management agency that flipped the script on traditional representation. Her aim wasn't merely to collect athletes under a brand, but to mentor, empower, and reshape the narrative of control in sports. For so long, athletes were told to perform, to be grateful, to follow. But Naomi had tasted what it meant to lead, and quietly, she offered others that same taste. Even in this new, venture-driven world, tennis remained. It waited for her, not out of obligation, but readiness. And in 2022, she began to tiptoe back across that familiar surface. Her return wasn't grandiose. There were no declarations, no promises, but she played. She competed in Miami, in Melbourne. She stepped back into press rooms, sometimes lightly, sometimes fully. Win or lose, there was something new in her posture. A softness, perhaps, or maybe just peace. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She was participating intentionally. The public had begun to recalibrate. No longer did the world expect Naomi to chase records or redefine dominance. Instead, her return felt poetic, a moment of translation. She was showing how to re-enter a world that once overwhelmed you because you've redefined the terms. The matches were not always wins, the headlines not always glowing, but the work was there. The effort, the joy. And around her, new tennis. Voices were rising, young stars who had grown up watching her, not just for her power or her technique, but for her humanity. These players spoke more openly about mental health, about culture, about pauses. Naomi's influence was rippling, not just in trophies, but in testimony. Still, she played with that same grace, her motions intact, her spirit tempered, but strong. And in crowd cheers that were once blaring, there came something, gentler respect. Witnessing someone who no longer had to dominate, to be extraordinary, because simply by returning, she already was. The world often moves faster for the next headline, the next star. But Naomi defied that current. She reminded us that return does not always mean resurgence. Sometimes it simply means remembering what called you in the first place. Not the fame, not the wins, but the feel of a ball meeting strings. The hush between points. The moment before serve where everything stands still, just long enough for breath to lead. The peace wasn't in stepping away. The peace was in stepping back, on her own terms. And as she picked up her racket once more, the world no longer demanded that she shouted, listened. Instead, for her whisper. She had always moved to quiet rhythms. But now, a new rhythm emerged, slow, rocking, deep and small. Not one measured in footsteps on a court or sprints across lines. This one began in a heartbeat, not her own. In the early months of 2023, Naomi Osaka became a mother. She carried life the same way she had carried the game, with grace, with solitude, with strength that did not ask to be noticed. Her announcement came not with fanfare, but with softness. a photo on social media, a simple caption, and just like that, one chapter closed and another dawned, a new beginning inside of her, moving with every breath. The name they gave her, Shy, a small name, a sacred one, of Hebrew origin, whispering meaning, gift. And that's what she became. Not just to Naomi, but to the parts of her story still tucked beneath the surface. The long days once lived in airports and arenas, schedules tight, as shoelaces now made looser, slower infused with lullabies and wonder. No. Playbook prepares even the most disciplined athlete for motherhood. There are no replay buttons for sleepless nights, no recovery drills for the aching stretch of love and worry. And yet, Naomi embraced it with the same mixture of surrender and stewardship that had defined her career. Was she ready? No one ever fully is. But readiness is not always a feeling. Sometimes it's a posture. Open arms, open heart. Each day, Shy crept into the architecture of Naomi's world, reshaping time, reshaping silence. Her daughter's breath became a new clock, a new purpose. And in that recalibration, Naomi deepened not just as a woman, but as a presence. When she looked into her daughter's eyes, perhaps she saw the very arc of her own childhood, the long practices, the early mornings, the pressure that had come so early, so fast, and now she could offer something different. Protection, truth, ease. This was her most intimate opponent. Yet motherhood not as a battle, but as a match that would neither end nor declare winners. Only moments, only growth. Naomi disappeared from the sport physically in those early days, but her spirit remained suspended in pause. In preparation, it was not a retreat, it was a redash, rooting, because something in her had shifted, grown. No longer just the weight of a racket in her hands, but a child, a future, a responsibility that stretched beyond scoreboards and studio lights. And then, slowly, as seasons turned, the chord began to hum once more. The racket surfaced, the tennis shoes laced her body, stretched differently, now still strong, but with memory stitched into each muscle fiber. Not just athletic memory, maternal memory, of months spent growing, of hours spent holding, of every lullaby sung with tired lungs and full heart. The comeback began gently. She signaled her intentions sometime in 2023, quietly in interviews and posts, declaring not what she would conquer, but what she hoped to reclaim. Herself, not the version that had won grand slams, not the face on magazine covers, but the one who loved the game, who loved the feel of a line clipped just right, the serve that kissed the net before falling in, the warm-up routine repeated like prayer before play. She returned not as a prodigal daughter of sport, but as someone born anew to the courts in 2024. She stepped, and the crowd saw her not as they once did, but with a different gaze. Where once they saw potential, now they saw progression. Where once they demanded victory, now they offered space. Her matches were watched not with assumption, but with respect, because everyone understood now she had already won something more permanent than a title. She moved across the court still lithe, still calculated, still deadly when she wanted to be, but there was release in her footfalls. No longer carrying the weight of idealism or identity, but realness, humanity. She was less polished now, but more whole. Her gaze softened in post-match interviews. Her voice, still gentle, carried something of a new authority, earned not from dominance, but from endurance. Motherhood had not dulled her edge. It had tuned her to a new frequency, one that could hear the hush between serves more clearly, that could forgive missed points more easily, that could hear her daughter laugh in the quiet between tournaments, and know there are many ways to win, and many courts on which life is played. She walks slower now, not from loss of strength, but gain of pause. There is intention in her stride, a softness that has replaced urgency, like the hush of waves that no longer need to crash to be powerful. Her presence is no longer only on the court, though it still waits for her. Her story moves differently, now less in headlines, more in echoes, less in shouts, more in whispers, and perhaps that is what she has always been building toward. Because not every revolution needs to roar. Some drift slowly into the fabric of time, carried by footsteps that leave no crater but press gently into the surface, lasting not because they erupted, but because they lingered. Naomi Osaka changed tennis. But not only tennis, she changed what it means to be visible, to be soft, to be strong. In a world that often asks its brightest to burn loud until they are consumed, she chose something else. She chose to burn steady. She chose to step away before the flame turned to ash dot. And when she returned, she carried with her not only the weight of motherhood, not only the hours of practice, but something rarer, clarity. Clarity that sport is not identity. That silence is not withdrawal. That power doesn't always look like domination. Sometimes power looks like grace under pressure. Sometimes it's the ability to remain yourself, especially when the world tries to write you otherwise. She became more than a player. She became a mirror in which others saw their own permission to be afraid, to speak gently, to rest, to bloom beyond their expected dimensions. Young athletes now cite her, not only for her skills, but her presence, her decision-making, her moments of refusal, her calmness amid chaos, her courage to say no, and her quiet, constant yes to herself. In the years ahead, trophies might fade behind new names. Courts might fill again with louder feet, but Naomi's echo will remain. Not because she owned every statistic, but because she let humanity lead. She stood between flags, between cultures, in a space many called complicated, but which she called home. She never asked to be everything to everyone. She simply asked to be, and that might be her greatest victory. There are moments, even now, when she returns to familiar courts. The net still trembles for her. The court still hums. The crowd still holds its breath, not waiting for a scream, but for the silence that follows her serve. In that hush, the world remembers the girl beneath a visor who bowed after matches, remembers the woman who wore 7 masks for the voiceless, remembers the mother who needed no permission to evolve. She walked through storms, through victories, through departures, through birth, through doubt, through fire, and never once did she stop, listening to herself, to the moment, to the quiet, because it was never emptiness, it was always presence. And so her story continues, not as a race, not as a conquest, but as a rhythm. One we may not always hear with ears, but feel quietly beneath the surface. Carried in each player she inspired, in each boundary she rew, in each pause she made sacred. The court will remember her, but more than that, the people will, because Naomi Osaka didn't change the game by force. She changed it by becoming the whisper that became the wind.